Good morning. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, Mr. Blaston. How are you? Good morning.
I'm doing well, Mr. Sugar. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. I want to, while I have a chance right now, I want to thank you for these sessions. They've been very, very helpful. I appreciate your patience and your openness.
It's my pleasure, truly.
Yeah.
If you have any comments, I've been keeping an eye out, again, in the inbox. I'm getting overwhelmed, frankly, with the feedback, which is great. But if you do have anything to say, by all means. I've been worried that I've been maybe, I don't know, discouraging folks somehow, but
Oh, no, not at all. Daniel and I will send along. We just have a very few comments and some clarifications. I mean, I think all of these are, in my mind, in line with both your duties and exactly what you should be doing. So we'll send something along here by the end of the weekend, but other than that, we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
excellent. Appreciate the feedback. Thank you for joining us too, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Hey, Mark.
Yes, ma'am.
Mary Fisher here. And again, thank you too. And you're a good moderator, and it's a balancing act. But this is just a very serious problem that we have across the country, not just in Nevada. And it's not rocket science. And I think we should be able to assure people that we can have fair elections. And I hope with these workshops that you're providing, and I was on the phone till 10 o'clock last night with some folks in Vegas who didn't even know about this workshop. And I don't know how I got on the list, but anyway, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. My pleasure. It is one thing I've reflected on over the last couple of days, that those of you who have taken time to join us on these 3 days of hearings truly share the same passion that I do, and understand the importance across the board. So in that, I agree. We are a collective community. At times, I wish we had more folks involved, for sure, and certainly open to it. But I'm happy that we have the people that we do. So I'm going to mute real quick, shut off my video for a few moments, and then I'll be back in about 4 minutes, and we can get ready to begin. Thank you, though. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have 8 a.m. I see a handful of people are still joining, so I'll drag my feet a little bit in the interest of including them in the opening comments. Let me make sure everything's ready and good to go. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Still a couple of people trickling in, but we're going to go ahead and get things started in the interest of your time. I do appreciate you all joining me this morning. So good morning. I'm calling this hearing to order at 8:03. For the record, I am Mark Voloshin, Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, and I will be conducting this regulations workshop today. Before we begin, I would like to clarify a few things. Our discussion today during this workshop will be focused on the proposed regulations listed in the agenda. We should not discuss changing statutes, which are of course created by the legislature. This regulatory process will not alter any existing laws. If there are general questions about elections procedures, I'll be able to discuss them as long as they relate to the proposed regulation. If there are questions that extend beyond the regulations on the agenda, I would be more than happy to set up a separate meeting at another time. To do so, please contact me at ndelect@sos.nd.gov. This is the public workshop for the Secretary of State Elections Division's proposed regulations with the following LCB file numbers: R080-21, R081-21, R082-21, R083-21, R084-21, R110-21, R111-21, R112-21, oh yeah, and R112-21. That's the last one. That's 8 total today. The text of all proposed regulations has been provided. The notice of the workshop to solicit comments on proposed regulation was noticed at all required locations on December 22nd, 2021. Each of these documents is hereby submitted into the record. As of Tuesday night at 7 p.m., the Secretary of State has received written public comment from multiple organizations and approximately 60 individuals. Since then, we continue, as of this morning even, to receive additional notices and written comment that I appreciate and will continue to review. The written public comment received by the Secretary of State's office is hereby submitted into the record. Finally, a few final administrative notes. I will be taking notes while you are providing comments. If you see me looking down, it is because I'm typing, but please continue, and I do appreciate that. And then second, if you haven't been part of a workshop in Zoom before, there's really 3 ways to indicate that you have a public comment to make. Please raise your hand physically, and I'll keep an eye out for it. The second way is if you look down in the Zoom bar at the bottom, you can either see a reactions button, or if you go to the more with the 3 dots above it, there's a reactions button there, and you can click the raise hand, just how Mr. Williams and I have done so, and you can see the hand appear in our screen. If you could, though, please assist us by lowering your hand after providing that public comment so I can identify who is interested in talking. And then the last way, of course, is by by looking at the chat. That just distracted me for a second. If you have a public comment to make and you're unable to raise your hand, or maybe if I missed it, if you simply put "I have a comment" to make in the chat, I'll review that as we move from agenda item to agenda item, and that way I'll be able to address your questions. I have noticed that it seems to work better if instead of asking the question in chat, if you just say that you have a question to make, or a statement to make rather, and that way then I can give you your appropriate time for you to voice your comments out loud. Okay. Regarding the agenda, we'll move on to agenda item number 2. General public comment. This is public comment on matters other than the previously listed LCB file numbers and proposed regulations. So this is public comment on matters not on our agenda today. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes per person. At this time, is anyone interested in providing public comment about a matter not on the agenda? If so, please identify yourself. Again, state your name for the record. I may ask you to spell it, but if you've typed it into your Zoom and renamed yourself appropriately, that'll be fine there. But otherwise, please state your name for the record. At this time, Mr. Williams, please. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me here. You mentioned not being able to talk about things that are not on specifically in the bills, but NRS 293D.200, which is referenced in the law and the regs. There's some problems with that thing. I'm not going to talk about it now, but I mean, it should be in one of your things that you guys should be fixing. There's some things in there that I would have fixed, but we'll get to that later. I want to make a statement. I've got a couple questions to ask, and I have a request for you as well. On statement, sort of an apology. I haven't really done my homework. I didn't have time to read all the underlying bills. Assembly Bill 321, 73 pages. There's parts apparently enacted, parts not enacted. I don't know if you were able to help me find those parts, so I just would be a courtesy, sir, but that's fine, not for now. I did get through AB 121, which is relevant to what we're going to be speaking about in a few minutes. And for all you people, it's only 19 pages long, so it's pretty easy to digest. And basically the law says disabled people shall have right to a means of electronic voting, in a nutshell. There's more to it, and we'll get to that obviously in a few minutes, because that's what R080 and R081 are all about. And the two should be taken together. They're actually quite the same. On questions, a couple questions. So when will all these changes to the regs that you're fixing now, when will these actually be enacted?
To answer that directly, depending on what comes out of the Legislative Commission that will occur sometime towards the end of February.
The Legislative Commission being what exactly?
The Legislative Commission is a body of elected officials who review and approve regulations. Oh,
is that information of who those people are available online? Can you get a link for that so I know who they are?
Yes, sir. I will put a link into the chat. Absolutely. The details, everything about Legislative Commission, and has additional information on it.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. Thank you. Here's my other question. This one's a biggie. So what if the Secretary of State posed with a law that is, for lack of a better term, repugnant? If the law is repugnant, and I believe that AB 121 is, and I believe that your guys' solution to it makes it even worse, and we'll get to that in a few minutes when these regs come up for discussion. But so my hypothetical question is, if there was some ethical or moral issue here, would she be against it? Would she say, no, I'm not going to support or enforce that law? This is repugnant. It could open me up to liability. It's wrong. has she ever done that? Would she do that here in regards to AB 121 and what you're doing here with R080, R081?
I won't speak for Secretary of State Sagaski, but I will say that she follows laws. She does not pick and choose the laws that she obeys.
What if it's repugnant? I mean, I'm going to make a really good argument in a few minutes that there's a real problem here. The ACLU, some others are not going to sit around and allow you to abuse the elderly the way this law is written and the way you interpret it, your adoption of the regs. All right, let me ask, I'm going to move on. Let me get to the request part. And actually, it's another question. I'll pose it as a question. Where in the NRS is the word adopt defined? And where in the NRS is the word regulation defined?
And I think maybe to best answer that, and Ms. Williams, again, going back to the time limit on the public comment this morning, I think we will have an opportunity to discuss this as it does relate to the regulations.
All right, there is no definition in the NRS. Thank you. Yield.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Thank you.
Mark, do you want me to just give the citation real quick?
Please, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Mr. Williams, regulation is defined in NRS 233B 038. And I was going to mention that later on because one of the definitions of regulation, it does talk about amending or repealing a prior regulation. So NRS 233B is the chapter of the Nevada Revised Statutes that is called the Administrative Procedure Act. It goes through all the requirements for adopting regulations and sets out workshops and adoption hearings, but that's the specific citation for regulation. So you're muted, so I don't know if you're talking back and saying bad things about me, but you've been a nice guy for 2 days, so I assume
I'm sorry. I probably muted because I my habit. It was NRS 088. Was it
233B 038?
Oh, I was close.
Very close.
Oh, thank you, sir. I will identify with that, and I appreciate your clarification. And by the way, I'm not a lawyer, sir. I'm not a lawmaker. I got dumped on my table with days to prepare, with hundreds and hundreds of pages of this kind of stuff. And I apologize if I make a mistake or if I say something stupid. That's all. Just indulge me. I appreciate it, sir. Thank you very much.
No, I'll just say that the administrative process is sometimes confusing and hard for lay people to come to because it's set out in statute and lawyers go through it all the time. It is supposed to be transparent to allow everyone to participate. And so it's understandable and I think probably expected that people come to it without the knowledge of the process. And I appreciate your willingness to look stuff up when you don't know. So thank you, and no need to apologize for anything on our behalf.
I'm contrite because I'm late to the game and I'm unprepared and I may say something really stupid and I don't like doing that. I'd like to have some move things forward. So this 233B 038 is definition of regulation.
Correct.
What about, do you have an NRS that focuses on what adopt means?
I don't have that. I can look for it.
Sure. We will need to know what we're dealing with so we can offer constructive criticism.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, sir.
Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Beatles, good morning.
Hey, good morning. I'm mobile today, so I'll do my best to pop in and out as much as I can, but I know we're in good hands with Oscar and many others. So Robert Beatles, Washoe GOP Central Committee Election Integrity Chair and Precinct Captain 5030. I just wanted some clarity on a couple of things. Obviously, we'll look into what you said. Obviously, I don't believe the Secretary of State has the authority to do this, but again, we'll look into that. But we still have questions that haven't been answered. Who actually drafted these regulations? I understand it's going to go in front of a commission, but you got 6 and 6. And again, we're still trying to find out who breaks the tie. Is that the Secretary of State? Because we've asked this a couple times, still haven't had clarity on it. So again, who drafted these regulations? Who breaks the tie? And again, with all the public, outcry to not do this and to go to paper ballots and, single day voting and no machines, why is there still such a push to do it? So I'd love to get those things, addressed. If you could, thank you.
Mr. Beatles, thank you for your comments. Specifically as possible, these regulations were initially drafted by Michelle, Troy, and I. These are members of the Elections Division that are employees of the Secretary of State. From there, we provided the drafts that we came up with. to our legal counsel, as well as over to the Legislative Counsel Bureau, or LCB. Individuals over there, as part of their organization, internally reviewed them for accuracy, to assist with other review of the process. And then from there, we've now presented them to you, the public, for your input as well. In regards to the makeup and voting process of the Legislative Commission, I don't know that again, that would fall on them. I do see that NRS 281E.150 also helps describe the creation, membership, and vacancies in terms of individuals on the Legislative Commission. But really anything in regards to their processes or procedures, the best thing I can do is ask you to talk to them. Their staff, again, on that same website that I just provided the link to, we'll be able to provide some answers to your questions about that. And I guess the last part is why are we doing this? Well, again, it goes back to the three main reasons that I just want to make sure I cite again today. After I was appointed as a deputy for elections, Secretary of State Sagaski, again, as part of her guidance to me initially from the get-go, was to not accept the status quo, to continue to look closely and critically at everything we do in the elections division to make sure that we are doing the most that we can within the confines of the state and federal laws that she is required to enforce and execute. And this is part of that process. I will tell you as well, again, just for your calendar, my intent is to make this a much more cyclical process. We talked about there's a statutory requirement in 293-247 that talks about elections related regulations being in place before the last business day of February. And so if you think about kind of the overall timeline of the biennium, right? Let's start with this year, for example. It's an election year. We'll have a primary in June. Regulations have to be done and in place by the last day of February. General election comes up in November. Really from November until the following February, right, is our window of time that we have to modify or improve or at the very least review regulations related to elections. That is something that I have on our long-term schedule as the election division, and we'll do this as part of the biennial cycle. So starting in December, we'll begin a regulatory review. Of course, as you know, starting February 1st, the first business day anyway of each odd numbered year, we have our legislative session. Depending on what bills are passed during the legislative session, that may also require additional modification and updating of regulations. But this process, this timeline, these are going to continue to happen, and I'm going to continue to publicly notice them appropriately and encourage the public to be involved. In fact, don't wait for the time. If you have any thoughts on regulations, look for the Nevada administrative codes. Start on 293, work your way through the rest of the elections related ones. And if you have feedback throughout the year, please let us know. So that way on your timeline, you can review them and be prepared to provide public feedback. Recognizing, of course, regulations don't alter statutes. They don't supersede statutes. And the secretary doesn't have a unilateral ability to create or ignore laws. So the regulations have a very specific role, but again, we encourage public involvement and public feedback at all times. So please don't think this is a one-off. Won't happen again for another decade. Like this is going to be something that we do every couple of years, every 2 years to be to be specific. Again, as a continuing effort to make sure that our elections are as secure and fair as possible.
Well, we sent you 7 pages of comments just on this right here alone today. So as you can see, I understand that. Yeah, I can understand you need to make things better, right? We need to make things more transparent. We need to put more trust back into our election system. But again, this does not do that. So look at Oscar and the rest of the team in our notes. You'll see that again, this is doing exactly the opposite of everything you just said.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Mr. Comp, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you very much. Mark Camp, for the record, candidate for Nye County Clerk. Just to make it simple for me, when do you expect that you will have these comments incorporated into these proposed regulations? And will you identify those comments and changes that came as a result of these meetings versus those that might have been additional things that you may have found? And that way we'll have some notice, because now I've signed up for your notices. And but when can we expect to see this pulled together?
Mr. Cobb, thank you for your comments. So first and foremost, the adoption meeting, the adoption hearings rather, that we're going to have coming up on February 2nd, 3rd, and then the 4th, actually, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. I'm sorry, the adoption hearings are 2nd, 3rd, and then not until at least the 22nd. We have another workshop on the 4th. During the adoption hearings, I'm not trying to scare anybody off, but they may be considerably longer than these workshops have been, because part of our process is going to be to go through the feedback that we've received in writing and orally through these workshops. And I will specifically cite and talk about some of the reasons why some of the things that were suggested. In some cases, it may, that would violate or go against the statute. This, that sort of thing. So to the best of my ability and recognizing that there are some level of limits, I will explain exactly as you said and talk about what has been accepted and encouraged or included as an adopted amendment to the regulations and what is not. And there have already been written comments and verbal comments that we've received in the last couple of days that have already been identified and flagged as being ideas that we would like to propose to the secretary to see what she thinks and make possible amendments. But bottom line, during the adoption hearings, that's when you'll hear for sure. And then in regards to Mrs. Crump's question in the notes about the e-notifier, that's something else that we have talked about before, but I want to make sure everybody's heard about. I just put into the link a link into the chat about the Secretary of State's website. There's an e-notifier that you can go to, and you'll notice that when you look at the page, you put in your information. That you then can click to see which, what certain types of information you're interested in getting notices about. Everything from certain business commercial recording functions to election integrity task force information to regulation hearings, those sorts of things. So by signing up there, we'll make sure that you're notified as well. Ms. Fisher, good morning.
Okay. Hi, good morning. Could you just tell me the primary ballots are going out April 30th? And I was wondering, when do they go to the printer?
Thank you, Ms. Fisher, for your comments. So again, primary ballots do go out at different dates based on the county. Excuse me. There's a federal requirement to send out military and overseas ballots, or you may hear them referred to as UOCAVA. That stands for the Uniformed and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act. UOCAVA ballots are required to be mailed no later than 45 days before an election. The clerks also, again, have a goal of, first of all, there's a statutory requirement to have ballots out at least 20 days before the election. They shoot for about 30 days prior to the election. When you, again, depending on the county, depending on the vendor, there's a number of factors that make the specific date that the vendors are provided the list of names to create those ballots. But that's typically between 60 and about 45 days, depending on again, the vendors. That's part of the reason why, and I think this is an equally important and useful time to highlight that, as this isn't on the agenda, if you are interested in opting out of receiving a mail ballot, the link I just put into the chat goes to the top of there's an SOS 2022 election information page, and at the top there's an opt-out form that is due by the 60th day before the election to ensure that your name is not on the list sent to the vendors for a mail ballot if that is something that you desire. Perfect. Is there anybody else interested in providing public comment at this time regarding an item not on the agenda? Okay, last thing, and then I'll move on. A couple questions about the Elections Integrity Task Force that I've cited. The Elections Integrity Task Force is an organization of organizations initially established under the Miller administration, I believe, when he was Secretary of State. And really, it's a formalized name for what had previously been an informal cooperation between federal and state stakeholders. So it's the members of the Elections Integrity Task Force include representatives from the FBI, Department of Justice, Office of the Attorney General, again, various county law enforcement individuals. LVMPD has a seat on it as well. But again, a number of stakeholders across state and federal government again, really the intent is to formalize the communication to kind of flatten it out, so to speak, so that as we approach an election cycle, when there's questions about elections integrity, when there are malicious attempts by foreign and domestic actors to conduct cyber attacks on our elections infrastructure, by having this pre-existing network of stakeholders across the state and federal entities, it helps streamline communication so that we can make sure the right people know about the right information and we're all on the same page. Okay. All right, I will see a couple questions about the other notices too. I'll make sure we copy those into the chat here momentarily as well to make sure you all have that. But at this time, I'm going to close general public comment then, and we'll move on to the workshop process. It is noted for the record that the regulations will be addressed one at a time in numerical order. Public comment will be taken in the same order, and public comment on a particular regulation will be closed before moving on to the next regulation. Before public comment is opened on each regulation, I will read into a record a summary of the proposed changes. All right, at this time, I will open the workshop on proposed amendment with LCB file number R080-21P. R080-21P. Okay, this is, here we go. Under existing law, make sure I'm not on mute, perfect. Under existing law, the Secretary of State is required to adopt regulations necessary for the execution and enforcement of the provisions of Title 24 of NRS. Existing law also requires the Secretary of State to adopt regulations for the conduct of elections in all cities and counties. Existing law requires the Secretary of State to establish a system of approved electronic transmission through which certain uniformed military and overseas voters may register to vote, apply for, and cast a ballot while in the military or overseas. Existing law also requires the Secretary of State to allow the system of approved electronic transmission to be used by 1, an elector with a disability to register to vote, and 2, a registered voter with a disability to apply for and cast a ballot. Existing law further requires the Secretary of State to 1, prescribe the form and content of a declaration for use by an elector or registered voter with a disability to swear or affirm specific representations. 2, prescribe procedures to be used by local election officials in accepting, handling, and counting ballots received from a registered voter with a disability using the system of approved electronic submission, and 3, adopt any regulation necessary to carry out these provisions. Section 3 of this regulation authorizes a registered voter who is unable to vote in person or timely return a mail ballot due to 1, an illness or disability resulting in the registered voter being confined to a hospital, sanatorium, dwelling, or nursing home, or 2, the registered voter being suddenly hospitalized, becoming seriously ill, or being called away from home to submit a request to a local election official to use the system of approved electronic transmission to cast and return a ballot. Section 3 also requires that the local election official send certain information to the registered voter. Section 4 of this regulation sets forth the declaration that the registered voter must submit with his or her ballot. Section 5 of this regulation provides that if a local election official receives a request for a ballot from a registered voter pursuant to Section 3 after a mail ballot has been sent to the registered voter, the local election official must indicate the mail ballot is canceled in the mail ballot record. Section 6 of this regulation provides that if a local election official sends a ballot to a registered voter pursuant to Section 3, the local election official must 1, cause a unique identification number to be included on the ballot, 2, record certain information in the ballot record, and 3, maintain the original ballot card in a secured area. Section 7 of this regulation requires not later than 60 days after the election, each local official to report to the Secretary of State certain information related to ballots sent to registered voters pursuant to Section 3. Section 2 of this regulation defines the term local election official. Existing law provides that each county clerk is encouraged to notify the public through means designated to reach members of the public who are elderly or disabled of certain election information, including that an elector with a disability may register to vote, and that a registered voter who is disabled may request and cast a ballot using the system of approved electronic transmission established for certain uniformed military and overseas voters. Existing regulations require the county and city clerk to provide notice of the availability of voting aids, and procedures for voting by absentee ballot. Sections 8 and 9 of this regulation provide that the county and city clerk must provide notice of the procedures for using the system of approved electronic transmission established for certain uniformed and military overseas voters pursuant to Section 3. That's the summary. Before I start, though, before we turn it over to public comment regarding proposed regulation R080-21, I do want to clarify two things. First of all, there was a significant amount of feedback that we received regarding this process, specifically EASE, the effective system for absentee voting. Where are we at here? Effective absentee system for elections. There we are. Effective absentee system for elections. The EASE system is a system that is only turned on 45 days prior. So if you go to one of the links that you'll see actually in the chat right now, thank you, Mr. Williams, you'll notice that it's not on or activated. That's the first thing. Second thing, there were questions and concerns about this being considered online voting. But online voting is not legal. Online voting would not be legal for military or overseas citizens either, period. There's a very distinct difference because the system, the e-system that we've had in place for I think since 2012 or so at this point, is one, not online voting, and two, it has been reviewed and continues to be reviewed on a regular basis by the EAC, the Elections Assistance Commission, and others to make sure that it's still in compliance with state and federal law. If it were considered online voting, it would be illegal and it would not be in place. And then the second thing I want to clarify, just to, again, because I suspect maybe some of you haven't used the EASE system before, I'm going to quickly share my screen to show what essentially happens with this process. When an individual currently in the military or overseas, or again, a member of the disabled community is authorized for use of the EASE system, when they go onto the system, there's a process that confirms their registration. Or if they're registering anew, they fill out information that will be verified by their county clerk or registrar. All of this happens again, as I probably should state now, well before their ballot is counted. These individuals go into the EASE system and it provides a list of candidates based on their precinct, their actual it goes down to precinct level, of course. So they get an actual ballot, so that even if they're working in an embassy in Azerbaijan or in are stationed down in someplace even as far away and as exotic as Southern California at Camp Pendleton, perhaps, if they're away from their home, they're able to use this system. When they log in and they go through again based on their home of residence here in the state, it provides, it's not a ballot. I want to clarify that. It's really a ballot preference form is what we've taken to calling it. And that's what I'm going to show you right now so that you can see. Screen pops up. They go through and they indicate the individuals for whom they are interested in casting a ballot. And then when they're done, they have three options to return that to their county clerk. They can print it out and mail it. And if it's a first-time registrant, you'll notice that it has a registration application. And then behind it is this ballot preference information behind it, indicating again who they're interested in casting a ballot for. When they print it, they can either email it through a secured process that we have, or it's again secured PDF and not exploitable. There's a number of pretty intense cybersecurity protections on it. And then the last part is they can mail it as well. I'm sorry, fax it, mail, fax, or email. They send it, they fold it up, they sign it, they get it back to their clerk. The clerk receives it. The first thing they do, as always, right, is verify the eligibility of the voter. If it's somebody that is not a military or overseas voter, if there's otherwise a question about why they would not be able to use the system, that becomes a flag that gets investigated. Once they confirm the eligibility of the voter, what happens is they have this ballot preference form that has been submitted, and the clerks transcribe it onto an actual ballot. Both are retained, of course, for 22 months pursuant to federal law, right? So this is, again, fully auditable and verifiable. At that point, again, the actual ballot, not the ballot preference form that was turned in, the actual ballot, again, this is after the confirmation that the voter is eligible, then it gets cast appropriately. So what I'm going to show you is an example of that EASE ballot, so to speak, or a ballot preference form rather, that is sent to a clerk. This form, again, is very deliberately set up so that it is not in a manner that can just be received and put into a tabulator. It's not something that is electronically sent from Azerbaijan and then goes right into our tabulation. Like, that does not occur. There is this very deliberate printing process, a validation process, and then a transcribing process. Some of you may say, well, that's kind of slow, it might be burdensome for the clerks. It is at times, but at the end of the day, again, this is an opportunity and means for military and overseas voters to cast their ballot. So it's certainly something that again, the clerks are aware of and allocate resources to address. All right, I'm sorry, I haven't shared my screen, Jesse. I wanted to finish the explanation first. Okay, so here is an example. I'll zoom in to make sure that everybody can see it. Here is an example. I just with some generally fake info that I put on the top, just to identify a precinct so you can see it. That would have been caught and not allowed, of course, but I'm providing this information so that you can see it. There's the affirmation, there's a declaration form, a spot for them to print it out and sign it, instructions, additional information. This is the voter registration form, a location to indicate their party affiliation. And then this is what it looks like. Again, see, it's not a ballot, it's a ballot preference form. And depending on what in the ease system, you would click on something and then it would connect the line. So it's very clear who the individuals are casting a ballot for. You'll notice that again, it includes every race, that if that individual were still in their precinct, they would be able to cast a ballot on or cast a vote for. All the way through, there's information on how to mail it back. It even auto-populates their information. Then they print, again, sign, scan it, and return it to the clerk. So again, not online voting, and a tested and true process that has been used for many years. In the 2020 election cycle, for example, 1,263 members of our electorate used the ease system to cast a ballot, of which I believe 93 indicated that they had a disability. There were more individuals who submitted ballots that could not be proven to be eligible. Those ballots were not cast, right? Because that again is an important thing that I want to state that I might be a bit redundant in, but I do want to clarify. Okay, so that being said, at this time, is there anybody interested? I'm sorry, we'll open public comment regarding proposed regulation R080-21. If there's anybody interested in making public comment on proposed regulation R080-21, please go ahead and indicate so at this time. Mr. Hindle, good morning, please.
Good morning, Mr. Vlashin. For the record, Jim Hindle, Vice Chair of the Nevada Republican Party. Here we go, starting off the day. So I'll go fast because I've got a lot on this one. Thank you for your explanation of the ease system. However, still, given the new regulations that are being proposed, the Nevada Republican Party opposes the proposed regulation R080-21P, which would expand the use of electronic voting. This testimony is strictly to address the proposed regulatory amendments and not the pre-existing NAC. Overall, the passage of AB 321 has all voters having access to a mail-in ballot, as well as the ability to vote in person. Regulation R080-21P seeks to expand the definition of the NRS from the overseas military members to any member of the public which lives in any dwelling and claims to be indefinitely confined. While this might be somewhat understandable with proof of confinement and no universal mail-in ballots, now that we have AB 321 with mail-in ballots of universally, there is no reason to expand this provision beyond our overseas military members. There is already a process for a hospitalized voter to request an emergency ballot via their county elections official. Nursing homes, by definition, tend to have residents which are unlikely to have extensive travel. These residents will already receive ballots by mail. There are also inconsistencies in the regulation. In section 3.2, this regulation would allow a voter to define their own illness via a brief explanation of why they were called away or from their home or why they are confined. However, this also allows them to request a ballot by email while confined to their own home. Anyone sick enough to be unable to leave their home already has access to the assisted signature program authorized in NRS 293-8857. They also presumably would be able to receive a note from a licensed physician using an office visit or telehealth appointment. Being able to self-certify a sickness so serious you can't check the mail is not a sufficient security measure for elections. Finally, aside from the fact that this is an unnecessary addition to the electoral process, it does not appear that voting by email has anywhere near the safeguards as voting in person. And we've talked about many of the loopholes and holes in that system these last 2 days. In section 3.3.6 of the proposed regulation, it is stated that any electronic ballot must instruct the registered voter that the ballot may not be used by another registered voter or duplicated. Many industries such as banking, medicine, mortgage loans have methods to secure documents that cannot be duplicated or modified by the recipient. Why is this standard for the cornerstone of our republic not at least as high as the standard used in finance? We recommend that this provision be removed, or at the very least modified to only include those who are actively hospitalized with the physician's documentation throughout the entire period of early voting and election day and not able to receive their mail-in ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hindle. One comment on that too, because the question came up when this regulation was first being initially discussed. Part of the concern in the electorate that we were trying to enable the clerks to support you mentioned Assembly Bill 321, which I understand and agree that does increase the opportunities for individuals. But because of the opt-out process, the concern was if an individual goes through an opt-out process and does not receive a mail ballot, it just, again, basically this would be an additional tool for the clerks. But I understand your comments and concerns, and I've taken note of them, so I do appreciate your feedback. Mr. Beatles, good morning. Mr. Beatles, we can come back. Oh,
yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm mobile, trying to figure out this thing on my phone is a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, at the point of sounding like a broken record, I mean, if you just go to operationsunlight.com, there's our petition right there. It's more like a manual. It gets rid of all this stuff and makes the elections, I would say, close to 100% trustworthy and 90% cheaper. This stuff doesn't make a lot of sense to me when you're looking at this regulation here. We sent you almost 5 pages of objections just to this one regulation here. I mean, there's nothing that's been more costly and vulnerable as a method of voting than what's in this proposal. And it doesn't explain to us what the cost estimate is. It doesn't tell us where the risk analysis is. We know the internet is not secure. You just walked us through. You were on the internet, literally. And CISA recommends that jurisdiction only use electronic, transmitted results for unofficial reporting. Manual transmitted results should be used in the official tabulation system. Create duplicate copies, and then of course validate their consistency. So you got a couple things there, and then I think lastly, you really want confined people who are sick, that are mentally disabled or insane, and or elderly or with dementia or Alzheimer's to use email, print a ballot, the instructions, read and understand the instructions, mark the ballot properly for each race and initiative, scan the ballot, and return via email or other electronic means. I don't see how that is even remotely sane. I would love to hear the rationale behind that. Again, we got 5 pages of notes for you too, so.
Is that the end of your testimony, Mr. Beatles?
Yeah, we sent you in 5 pages. So
yes, sir. I saw it this morning. I haven't had a chance to read everything just yet. Again, there's been a lot of written testimony provided, which I appreciate, but I did see your comments on this, and I do appreciate that. I'll make sure I review them and take them into consideration.
Yeah, Oscar and team's been working really hard. There's 7 pages total, 5 just on this one regulation. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fisher, please.
Yes, I just have a question. Can the Secretary of State's office, when they receive the ballots, whether electronically or however printed out, can they see who the individual voter has voted for? Whether they voted, who the candidate was that they voted for, or what party they voted for?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question and comments. Yes, that part of the ease process as the individual is going through the site, to get to that point. They do identify that there is an increased chance that the idea of secrecy of the ballot may be violated. It's something that clerks, again, this is, as you can imagine, something they take very seriously, and typically are the sole individual to again, when somebody will print it out, and then when it comes to the transcription onto a separate process, again, having the ballot in a way so that the individuals transcribing it are not able to see the name of the individual providing it. That's something that like the clerks oversee to make sure that there is as secure a process as possible, so that the individuals involved do not see the individual and the names. Does that answer your question? These, by the way, do go straight to the clerks. They do not come to the Office of the Secretary of State. We don't see them at all, if that helps.
Yeah, that helps. I just, you know, as a poll observer for 3 weeks in the last election, I kind of felt like the number of voters that brought their cell phones and took photographs of their ballots that they voted. I thought, like, are they going to take those photos and send them to someone who will give them an award for voting however they voted? I don't know. I just think, like, if there's supposed to be a secret ballot, I don't think taking images of your ballot in the booth while you're in the booth and putting it on the internet, I just don't think that defeats the purpose, and just makes a mockery out of the secret ballot.
Yes, ma'am, I understand. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Williams, before I start your time, there's a couple questions I see here. Question about what percentage of military voters. So it's interesting, right? The Department of Defense is broken up by branch. Each branch has Title 10 responsibilities to man, train, and equip its own force. So as such, there's not necessarily like a single spot you can go to find out how many Nevadans are in the active or reserve or guard forces. Some estimates that I've identified as part of my research were about 12,000 Nevadans at any given moment are part of the United States military services in one way or another. So approximately, again, I think it's about 1,200 folks used it. Roughly 10%, give or take, is what we anticipate. And then disabled voters, again, it was basically a pilot program. Only about 93 folks used it that were of the disabled community during this last election cycle. But Mr. Williams, your turn, please.
Hi, how many disabled people will this be affecting? How many disabled people are impacted by AB 121, please?
I don't have a specific number, but I do seem to recall from the 2021 legislative session during some of the testimony by advocate groups on Assembly Bill 121. I thought I recalled somebody citing roughly 1 in 6 voters has a disability as defined by NRS.
So 1 in 6 voters are going to be able to print their own ballot and mail it in, not including the military.
Again, pursuant to Assembly Bill 121, that is my understanding.
Very well. Tell me about the security measures of these PDFs. What ability would I have to alter voter identity on these things? Could I hack the PDF and start printing out all sorts of new names and having fun with it if I was malicious? So how are you protecting that?
There are, again, the PDF itself actually is encrypted using, again, modern state-of-the-art technology with encryption services. Again, part of the reason why
a Russian hacker could beat that in 2 seconds. You know that. We got some Russian hackers in our team. We will do it for you if you don't. We'll show you with the vulnerabilities, and we can maybe offer suggestions to improve it. But I think if we got rid of printed, self-printed ballots, I think we'd be a lot happier. And particularly when you're doing this with the elderly. And I have to give you a personal anecdote here, right? I'm going to relay this. My mom was an Alzheimer's patient. She lived at Stone Valley over in Reno, the Alzheimer's dementia facility, for many, many years. She died in February 2019. I was her legal guardian. All right. Her ballot went to me. There's no language in any of these regs or in AB 121 that memorializes the rights of the guardian or of wards of the state. So I think there's a real problem with that. Furthermore, frankly, this AB 121 sets up a system of that is ripe for abuse of the elderly, of the mentally ill. It's exploitation, it's discrimination in a way, and it's a complete waste of money because these people are the least likely ones to be using this technology. It's a waste of their money. My mom didn't have an email address. She couldn't even understand the instructions in the last years of her life. So, you know, the fact that she got a ballot, she's not adjudicated insane, but she was insane. I mean, she lost her mind from Alzheimer's. And so I fail to appreciate how her tax dollars are benefiting her through AB 121. And I think it's ripe for fraud, exploitation, coercion, abuse of the elderly and others. And frankly, the whole thing is I appreciate, I came to a realization that, you know, adopting regulations is perfectly applied in this situation because AB 121 is written so poorly. And the cures that came up through the legislative commission are so poorly written. I mean, there's some real flaws in the language, just, you know, grammatical stuff, logic. It's shameful. And I see this all as a mission creep because today we're going to allow the sick and the elderly to have print out their own ballots and mail them in. And tomorrow we'll just expand it to the world because it's creating a disparity of the statewide standard, which is your charter to maintain a statewide standard. So some people can do internet voting, but other people can't. But so let's just make everybody print out their own ballots and mail them in. That's where this is going, sir. And I object to that wholeheartedly.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Williams. They are noted and we'll take into consideration.
Also, one more point, two more points, real quick. It creates an audit nightmare. How do you audit all these people printing out their ballots? Are any of their laptops certified by the election commission?
To be clear, they don't print ballots. Nobody prints ballots. Nothing is cast until it's transcribed by the clerk after validation of the eligibility of the individual.
It's got a printed envelope thing,
Yep.
doesn't it?
That doesn't
Okay.
get routed through a tabulator. And really, perhaps I should have started with an even more detailed explanation about the, you know, what happens behind the scenes when these are received by a clerk. Again, it doesn't get printed out. It does not go into a tabulator. There's a transcribing process. This document is received and validated first and foremost. So again, nothing is touched, nothing is done until they've confirmed the eligibility. So that even if one of the Russian hackers on your team that you just cited a minute ago hacks them and puts in 100 million names or 10,000 for one county,
That's the
if
risk.
they're not, or even 20, then again, if that individual isn't validated as an active registered voter, then they're not going to get their information. The process stops there.
Well, we've got, you know, hundreds of thousands of bogus voters on the registration rolls, and you have public access to the database, you know, and these people know their game. They're very sophisticated at it, and the whole system is completely ripe for exploitation, particularly when you get into mailing stuff internationally and in areas where maybe security is an issue. I think there's a national security issue with any kind of internet mailing of ballots to military or government officials who could be in potentially compromised security areas of the world. Or maybe you're in the military and you're out in some godforsaken desert and you don't have internet access. You still get a mailed ballot. And so there's some duplication of what we already provide in terms of a mailed ballot. You know, maybe the state could work with the feds to include our ballot initiatives and things on the presidential race that they are required under US code to send their presidential designees, as they like to call them, otherwise known as covered voters, otherwise known as military and government overseas. Several terms we get to sort of basket in that.
Yes, sir. Mr. Williams, I understand. And again, it's starting to get a little bit outside the scope of the regulation itself. I do register your displeasure and comments in consideration about this. We'll take them into consideration.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Sir. Mr. Sackerson, good morning.
Good morning. For the record, Ralph Sackerson from Elko County. I want to support Oscar's comments with the simple fact that for people who work in professional graphics, whether it be advertising, engineering services, what have you, manipulating these documents, even if they are encrypted, is very conceivably in the normal course of a business day. So the ability to hack these things is astonishingly simple. And I find it interesting that we're espousing the use of email and electronic ballots when most of the world, puts ink on your thumb and they do it with paper ballots. And that's what we need to do, is do this with paper ballots. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Seckerson. I appreciate your comments and time. Does anybody else have comments or feedback on proposed regulation R080-21? Okay, thank you. If not, then I'll close public comment regarding proposed regulation R080-21. And we will open the workshop on proposed regulation R081-21. Existing law requires the Secretary of State to establish a system of approved electronic transmission through which certain uniformed military and overseas voters may register to vote, apply for a military overseas ballot, and cast a military overseas ballot. Existing law also requires the Secretary of State to allow the system of approved electronic transmission to be used by 1, an elector with a disability to register to vote, and 2, a registered voter with a disability to apply for and cast a ballot. Existing law further requires the Secretary of State to 1, prescribe the form and content of a declaration for use by an elector or registered voter with a disability to swear or affirm specific representations. 2, prescribe procedures to be used by local election officials in accepting, handling, and counting ballots received from a registered voter with a disability using the system of approved electronic submission. And 3, adopt any regulation necessary to carry out these provisions. Section 3 of this regulation provides that a person is an elector or registered voter with a disability if the elector or registered voter, 1, has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of the major life activities of the elector or registered voter, 2, has a record of such impairment, or 3, is regarded as having such an impairment. Section 4 of this regulation requires a registered voter with a disability who applies for a ballot using the system of approved electronic transmission to indicate whether 1, the local election official must send the ballot to the registered voter by mail or approved electronic transmission, and 2, the registered voter will return the ballot to the election officials by mail or approved electronic transmission. Section 4 further requires the local election official to provide to the registered voter certain instructions depending on whether the registered voters will return the ballot by mail or approved electronic transmission. Section 5 of this regulation sets forth the form of the declaration to which a registered voter with a disability must swear or affirm. Section 6 of this regulation provides that if a local election official receives a request for a ballot from a registered voter with a disability after a mail ballot has been sent to the registered voter, the local election official must indicate that the ballot is canceled in the mail ballot record. Section 7 of this regulation requires a local election official to 1, cause a unique identification number to be included on a ballot sent to a registered voter with a disability, and 2, record in the ballot record certain information related to a ballot sent to a registered voter with a disability. Section 8 of this regulation requires not later than 60 days after the election, a local election official to report to the Secretary of State certain information related to ballots sent to voters with disabilities. Section 2 of this regulation defines the term local election official. Existing law provides that each county clerk is encouraged to notify the public through means designated to reach members of the public who are elderly or disabled of certain election information, including that an elector with a disability may register to vote, and a registered voter who is disabled may request and cast a ballot using the system of approved electronic transmission established for certain uniformed military and overseas voters. Existing regulations require the county or city clerk to provide notice of the availability of voting aids and procedures for voting by absentee ballot. Sections 9 and 10 of this regulation provide that a county or city clerk must provide notice of the procedures for registering to vote and voting using the system of approved electronic transmission established for certain uniformed military and overseas voters. Existing regulations require that a local election official provide instructions to cover voter for marking and returning a military overseas ballot, including an explanation, military overseas ballot, and any other necessary voting materials must be received by the office of the appropriate election official by 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the day of the election. Section 11 of this regulation provides instead that the instructions include an explanation of the deadline for a covered voter to cast and return the military overseas ballot and other necessary voting materials. Section 12 of this regulation revises the form of the declaration of a covered voter to eliminate obsolete language. At this time, if anybody's interested in providing public comment on proposed regulations R081-21, I will open public comment again, specifically on proposed regulation R081-21. Please go ahead and indicate in the that you are interested in making that public comment. Mr. Zachary Hayes, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. With regard to this regulation, section 4, subsection 4, page 5, I agree that it's good that the electronic that it instructs that electronic ballots can't be duplicated, but my concern is that there's not a sufficient check to make sure that the provision is enforced. And is there more of a mechanism that I'm missing in place to ensure that the mail-in ballots are disseminated securely and not duplicated?
Yes, sir. Again, when these ballots are provided to individuals who request them, again, via mail or otherwise, they are associated to the voter who they're issued. So that way we can ensure that, serial number, whatever, doesn't get duplicated numerous times to prevent that from happening.
Thank you.
Mr. DeGraffenreid, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. For the record, my name is Jim DeGraffenreid, and I'm the Nevada Republican National Committee man. Nevada Republicans respectfully request that the same required proof of impairment that is required in Regulation 080, Section 3.2, be applied to any form of electronic ballot transmission outside of traditional military and overseas ballots. While we don't support the legislation that created this regulation, AB 121, we understand that it has been passed into law. Because of that, it's essential that we maintain a consistent standard for electronic transmission of ballots. A key improvement to this regulation will be a secure electronic transmission of the ballot that meets the same minimum standards as the banking industry. As an insurance broker, I'm very familiar with some of these systems as we use them for secure transmission of completable documents as well. Additionally, this law unfortunately opens the door for abuse of the disabled via illegal intimidation of a voter in a private environment. One supplement to ensure that a voter was not pressured into voting the way their caretaker might support rather than their own preference is to also require a witness signature with public identifying information for the witness. I've reviewed the language in AB 121 as enrolled, and there does not appear to be any prohibition on requiring a witness signature and identifying information. Finally, the bar for electronic ballots should be extremely high as all voters are now receiving unsolicited mail-in ballots. And the passage of AB 321 allows for additional duplicate ballots to be provided to as many as 1 in 6 voters who are estimated to be disabled under the definition in NRS, even though many of these disabilities that are defined in statute would not affect their ability to cast a ballot. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. DeGraffenreid. Ms. Fisher, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, please.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity, sir. I'm going to use my mom's example. This would, when you're in a confined environment, whether you're mentally ill, you're incarcerated, you have dementia, you're hidden from the public. You were intentionally hidden from the public. They don't let anybody in those facilities, and they do not accept mail for, well, they can, but they shouldn't, particularly when it comes to a ballot, because those people generally have guardians with power of attorney. So AB 121 and all the regs that you're doing to fix a badly written law it would seem to invade the privacy of these confined people who are being protected. The veil is gone once you institute this policy. I'm concerned about that, okay? The other thing I'm concerned about is, which I believe Jim touched upon, is, you know, there are other laws that affect the rights of those kinds of people, and the AB 121 trashes those. So you're going to have conflicting laws, which is what you've asked us to do here, is help you find conflicts that maybe adjust your posture. And so we would ask you to adjust your posture based on this. And I can maybe do a little more research to fine tune that. I'm being a little loose with my argument right now. I don't have the NRSs at my fingertips but Jim did a great job with the one he cited. I mean, perfect example, okay? Well done, Jim, by the way, very well done, sir. And so really there are checks and balances when when somebody from the outside, non-family, comes into one of these controlled facilities. There are laws, there's rules. Nobody can come in without my authority to see my mom. If there's a psychiatrist, a social worker, anybody, they absolutely have to have my authority to go and talk to my mom. And that is, there's nothing in here that memorializes the rights of the guardian and protects the rights of the confined person. AB 121 is an abomination, it's repugnant, and your regs, I wholeheartedly disagree and object to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I appreciate your comments. Ms. Fisher, please.
Okay, I have a question and I haven't really reviewed all of or any of the proposed bills or regulations, but I do have a comment that wouldn't there be a need to put on these regs on each one that what the penalties would be if you lie or you cheat or try to do something? And that's my comment.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And actually, it's already defined in Nevada Revised Statute and under 293 in a number of different places. If you look under 293-700 down through 840, it talks about unlawful acts and penalties. And there's a number of other places too where it cites very specifically what the penalties are for a violation of Title 24. Again, generally speaking, it's a Category E felony, though. If you lie, falsely attest, or attempt to, for example, submit a second vote, voting, more than once during an election. But thank you for your comments, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Beatles, please.
Hey, thanks, Mark. So Oscar covered most of it, did a great job. I mean, obviously we're really against this, but you mentioned a couple things. You mentioned that this could affect 1 in 6 voters, and then you also mentioned that we have the ability to audit or to verify for 22 months to do some kind of, accounting of it, right, with the ballots. Now, who's going to have the ability to do that actual audit of these ballots? Because like with 2020, we don't get access to them at all. We're supposed to just trust and not verify, period. It's like me winning the lottery, but my best friend is the lottery commissioner. And when anybody asks to see the ticket, I don't show it to anybody because I got the commissioner on my side. So we don't have to show the lottery ticket to the world. Everybody just has to trust that I won the lottery. So again, how do we make sure that we can check to see that these ballots are going to be legitimate, not just ripe with fraud, like so many other issues with this? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beatles. Just to clarify too for everybody, and I'll put this into the chat as well. NRS 293.391 talks about the 22-month requirement and it explains a little bit about who's allowed to review those with again a court order, and also where they're at, kept in the vaults of the county clerk and preserved for at least a period during which the election may be tested and adjudicated. So again, I'll put the link to 293.391 in the chat for everyone's awareness.
That's great, but we still can't have access to them. We tried. Trust, no verify. I understand what the NRS says, but it's not happening.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Beatles. Is there anybody else at this time interested in providing public comment regarding proposed regulation R081-21.
So to kind of go with what Mr. Beatles was just saying, because he kind of asked again, like,
I'm
okay,
sorry, ma'am, do you have a comment? Do you mind saying your name for the record, just so I can record it as well?
sure, Bianca. Do you need a last name?
Yes, please.
Barnes, Garnes.
Perfect. Thank you, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Sure. So along the lines of what he was saying, because I don't think he necessarily got an answer. So yes, that's in the NRS, but how is that going to be enforced? Like, what's going to happen that's going to make us, so just because it's in our NRS doesn't mean anything's being done about it. And that's the point that he was making. So how are we going to make sure that that happens?
Which part? The retention of documents for 22 months?
Well, he was saying that we don't have a chance to review, like if his, like basically what he was just saying about if he wins the lottery.
Oh, right. In that regard. So again, because NRS 293-391 states specifically how long and where these documents are retained, as well as laying out who has access to them, that's not something that this regulation is going to be able to change or modify. Again, if you're interested in changing NRS 293-391, there's a process for it, but this unfortunately is not it.
Okay. Yeah, I joined a little bit late, so I just wanted to ask because I didn't hear an answer to what he said. So okay.
Yes, ma'am. One moment, let me take my notes and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, if there's no more questions or public comment regarding proposed regulation R081-21, I'll close public comment at this time and open the workshop on R082-21. Existing law authorizes the Secretary of State to adopt regulations relating to campaign practices. If a candidate, person, organization, committee, political party, or nonprofit corporation that is required to file a campaign finance report or registration form pursuant to Chapter 294A of NRS fails to do so in accordance with applicable provisions of that chapter, existing law provides that such a candidate, person, organization, committee, political party, or nonprofit corporation is subject to a civil penalty. However, existing law authorizes the Secretary of State to waive such a civil penalty for good cause shown. Similarly, existing regulations authorize under certain circumstances the Secretary of State to waive or reduce such a civil penalty for good cause. This regulation provides that the Secretary of State will not waive or reduce such a civil penalty for good cause on the basis that the Secretary of State did not send a reminder notice that a report or form for registration was due before the applicable deadline. At this time, I will open public comment regarding proposed regulation R082-21. If there's anybody interested in making public comment regarding this proposed regulation, please go ahead and indicate so now. Mr. Williams, please.
Hello, thank you. This reg, as far as I can tell, does not enable voting, doesn't lower costs of the elections, it being something that affects the political process itself and political action committees. And there's no approval from the legislature or the governor regarding this. And I think on some level, there really is no reason for this reg at this time. I highly recommend you wait for the 2023 session and let the legislature sort this one out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Appreciate your comments. And just for clarity's sake, again, when the Secretary directed us to conduct a whole holistic review of all regulations related to Title 24, it was not just on NAC, the Nevada Administrative Code 293, but really all of the chapters, including those relating to campaign finance, such as this one. That's part of the reason you may have noticed that some of these. Again, there wasn't a prioritization at the end of the day. There was a prioritization at the end of the day, but we still included the full scope of the Secretary's guidance in our review. This one in particular, again, it doesn't have an impact. You're right for I think the general public, but this is certainly something that has come up numerous times over the last few years, where individuals or organizations protested and said we want to request a waiver pursuant to the statute, and also because you didn't send a notice to remind me of the duties that are expected by statute. So this is merely to clarify that, but I understand and appreciate your feedback on this. At this time, are there any other public comment regarding proposed regulation R082-21? If not, then I'll close public comment on proposed regulation R082-21 and open the workshop on proposed regulation. Opening the workshop on proposed regulation R083-21. Existing law requires that the Secretary of State to adopt regulations relating to the recall of public officers. Existing law requires a notice of intent to circulate a petition to recall a public officer to be signed by 3 registered voters who 1, voted in the state, county, district, or municipal election at which public officer was elected, and 2, reside in the jurisdiction represented by the public officer. The Nevada Constitution requires that a petition to recall a public officer contain not less than 25% of the number of persons who actually voted in the state, county, district, or municipality represented by the public officer at the election in which the public officer was elected. Moreover, existing law requires that the signatures on the petition be verified in accordance with specified statutory guidelines. This regulation provides that a petition to recall a public officer may be withdrawn if 1, at least 2 of the registered voters who signed the notice of intent submitted notice of withdrawal to the filing officer on a form prescribed by the Secretary of State, and 2, the notice of withdrawal is received by the filing officer before the petition is submitted to the filing officer for signature verification. This regulation further provides that once a petition to recall a public officer is withdrawn, no further action may be taken on that petition. Finally, this regulation requires not later than 24 hours after receiving a notice of withdrawal, the filing officer to notify the Secretary of State, the public officer who is the subject of the recall, and if only 2 of the registered voters who signed the notice of intent submitted the notice of withdrawal, the 3rd registered voter who signed the notice of intent. At this time, if there's anybody interested in providing public comment regarding proposed regulation R083-21, please go ahead and indicate so now. Mr. Williams, please.
Hello, thank you. So basically, my understanding is 10% of the population is required to sign the recall petition. Is that right?
I'm sorry.
10% of the population is required to sign a recall petition. Is that correct? 10% of the population to recall.
The question on what I just read, I can read that again for you. I apologize. The Nevada Constitution requires that a petition to recall a public officer contain not less than 25% of the number of persons who actually voted in the state, county, district, or municipality represented by the public officer at the election in which the public officer was elected.
Oh, so the recall is at the county level.
So if you're recalling a county official, then the focus is 25% of the individuals that voted during that election at the county level. If it's a statewide one, so that's the intent behind it, depending on the level of jurisdiction of the individual being recalled.
So R082 has to do with, maybe I misread it. It's not for state officials, it's for local.
So this is in regards to NRS 306 and a regulation relating thereunto. So this is, I guess this is did I not read that right? Would you like me to read it again, or I guess I don't understand the question.
I guess I'm a little confused, and that's normal. Here's my problem with it. If it's 25% of the county or 10% of the state, whatever the requirement is, you're talking about thousands and thousands of people potentially, but this reg allows 2 people to derail the process. And I think it's ripe for treachery. If you want to screw up somebody's recall of a candidate that you like, you can sign the petition and then go, oh no, I'm going to take my signature back. And if 2 people do that, they derail the whole process and the will of all those people, the thousands that do want it to go forward, that don't like that guy and want to get rid of him. It's ripe for treachery and abuse. I don't like it. Thank you.
And I apologize, Mr. Williams. I understand now. So we're talking about the 3 individuals who signed the notice of intent. So when a recall petition is filed, in addition typically to the formation of a political action committee for the purpose of recalling of a candidate, there's PAC documentation, and then there's also a notice of intent. The three individuals have to be registered voters who are basically the three individuals that initiate the recall. So out of the three,
It's a PAC. A
individuals
PAC has to make the recall, not the citizens.
no, these are citizens. They're registered voters, and this is Mr. Williams. So this is just talking about the notice of intent and the individuals who started it. So the three individuals who initiate the notice of intent and begin the recall process, we're talking about the three of them. So if you sign a petition and then decide to withdraw your name, this does not apply to the signatures of registered voters. This is purely relating back to the notice of intent.
Weird. All right. Okay. I thought there's some confusing language here. Written notes. I won't bother the party, everybody with it now, but you clarified it. I'm a little confused. I object to this reg, but thank you.
Yes, sir. Ms. Fisher, please.
Yes. Okay, so 25%, the Nevada Constitution requires that a petition to recall a public officer contain not less than 25% of the number of persons who actually voted. Well, we have got so many people who are voting 2 and 3 times, who the rolls, the voter rolls are so skewed. We have got millions of illegals getting the right to vote. So that raises, so if you've got 25% of legal voters of the legal votes cast, which would be lower, we've got now 25% of all of the illegal votes, which raises the number of signatures that we have to provide on our recall petitions. And you're also asking, moreover, existing laws require that the signatures on the petition be verified. And it seems like we've got more verification to do on a recall than we do on our actual of casting of votes. But I really just think that if we're not providing a fair election and the 25% is just out of reach, if people are voting 2 and 3 times. And that's all my comment is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher, for your comments. I've taken note and will take into consideration. For clarity's sake, again, registered voters, again, you're a verified voter before you're able to cast a ballot in the election in the first place. If you have any information or evidence regarding specific individuals who you believe voted more than once in any election, please let me know. Statute of Limitation is just 3 years, but I will, again, aggressively investigate any and all allegations. So please do not hesitate. Even if I already have them, frankly, and even if they're already under investigation, I would rather you default to providing that information so that I can investigate it. Because again, Secretary Segasky takes this very seriously. And then lastly, I just want to say that with the initiative and referendum process, the signature verification, so that when somebody goes around and has a petition that they want to gather signatures for, be it a recall or whatever, once they believe they have the sufficient number of signatures required, and those are all turned in, there is a verification process. As you can imagine, that there's times when individuals maybe from out of state or people who just moved here sign a petition, and that sounds great. I don't like that guy. Yeah, let's recall him or whatever. I agree with that. Not realizing that you had to have voted in the election that individual was elected in order to be part of that recall petition. So in that case, that's what the clerks are looking at. It says my internet connection is unstable. Did I just freeze for a second there? Am I okay now? Okay, now I'm back. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Williams. So the initiative, again, process, that verification makes sure that, again, one, the signatures of the individuals that signed it did in fact vote during the election in which the individual was elected. And that two, they are still eligible voters. They were canceled, inactivated, then those signatures are no longer valid either. Those again come off of the list. That's why, it's one of the best practices I've heard anyway, that if you're required to get 150 signatures, to not get 151, but probably to keep going to get more in the event that somebody who's well-intentioned but unwittingly signs it and that is not a valid signature for that petition, then that name will come off and the numbers go down. So apologize for the quick class on the initiative and referendum process, but certainly open to discussing it more at a later time. Ms. White, good morning. Do you have comments, please?
Good morning. Yes, and I'm just trying to understand the intent of it. I mean, I assume that all of the numbers of percentages of eligible voters to sign the petition, all of that is the same. It hasn't been changed there. This whole thing is just to clarify and add that the petition, the request to file, to begin collecting signatures for a petition can be nullified or ended with two of the three individuals submitting the request or the intent to get signatures. Is that correct? That's the only reason for this language.
Yes, ma'am. And in fact, I'm going to pull up a notice of intent from a few years ago, just to use as an example. And I think you're right. That may help clarify the intent as well. One moment, please.
So there was nothing like this existing before about how to nullify a notice of intent?
Yes, ma'am. And that was the kind of exactly what we're trying to get at. There was a question of what if only one person out of the three who filed the notice of intent, is that enough to cancel the entire process? Or is it more appropriate for two of three at least to be required to withdraw that notice of intent?
Right. And just the verification process, I'm assuming that what you do is the Secretary of State would go through and check the signatures to see if those signatures are registered voters, and if they voted in any of the last three or all of the three.
It's specifically if that individual, so if they want to recall the fill in the blank position, whoever that position, that individual is, you have to have voted in the election. That you don't have to have voted for that individual, but you have to have voted in that election to be valid.
Okay, so
yeah.
In the last three elections, I read that someplace. I'm not sure what I'm getting confused there. Anyway, so in order to know who those voters are who voted in the election that's recalling candidate A, can we request a list of those people who voted in that election from the Secretary of State?
I believe so. I believe you could try to. And again, I'm trying to think, if it's been done that way or not.
So I'm imagining somebody out in front of a grocery store saying, did you vote in the 2020 election? Well, that happens to be a big one, so most people remember. But if you say, did you vote in the 2018 election when some candidate A was elected? They're going to say, oh boy, I can't remember if I did or not. What it's done is it's making it hugely difficult to gather enough signatures to know. So unless we got a sorted list where we could reach out to those voters, without a shotgun reach, it's going to be almost impossible. It just seems like every time we add a regulation, what it's doing is it's making it more difficult for a petition to succeed. And you can call me paranoid or whatever you want, but I saw the same thing happen in California over and over again. Each little regulation and statute was added, which made it even more difficult to get somebody out of office. And so that's my worry here.
I see. And I will, just to clarify then, ma'am, that again, this really is just going back to the notice of intents that I just pulled up and looked at. All of them were only signed by one individual, which of course would make it easier. If that one individual decides to withdraw the notice of intent, he or she would be able to do so. This really just clarifies it again. If it's three individuals on the notice of intent, it takes at least two to withdraw it. Again, just for clarity's sake, and also while we have everybody on here, just a reminder that Nevada is one of the states that has a no There's no requirement for a recall. Other states that I've heard of may have ethical or legal, violations must have occurred before a recall petition can be filed. That's simply not the case here as well. But again, I think we're starting to stray slightly from the regulation, but I do want to get through a few more people that have some comments.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to take up more time, but this is making it more difficult. It's making it more difficult for a petition to succeed. I don't understand why it needs to be 3 people now instead of just 1. I mean,
the idea is so that one person can sabotage it and say, I'm done, I don't want to, and then the other 2 still agree. Now that at least there's a majority of the 3 people that filed the notice of intent.
you just said though that 1 person can file a notice of intent before
Yes.
the this regulation.
Yes, people, no. So looking at notice of intents, there's 3 spots, again, I just find a blank one. There's 3 spots for a notice of intent originator. And if they're all 3, if there are 3 people that submitted it, then it takes at least 2. If there's only 1, then this doesn't apply. So this is just to allow the process to continue without, again, basically worry about sabotage. This does not affect the difficulty associated with filing a recall or otherwise petition.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Crump, please.
Hi, good morning. I'm sorry to beat a dead horse here. The letter of intent, it requires 3 people's signature to file. Before, was there any regulation of 1 person can back out and the whole thing collapses? Or is this a new introduction of now 2 people can back out of the letter of intent and the whole thing collapses? Is this new?
So this is purely to state that if there are 3 people that have signed the notice of intent, it takes 2 to cause the withdrawal of it.
This is a new clarification to the letter of intent.
Yes, ma'am.
I seriously object to this. This applies undue pressure, be it monetary or any other kind, for the person being recalled and anyone in their camp or campaign to pressure those people who put their name and word out there on the line and put forth the letter of intent. They could be pressured in how many ways, be it blackmailed or anything else, by the camp that doesn't want the person recalled. This sets them up for extreme duress. I have no idea why anyone would include this in here. The 3 people signed, the petition is in play, and it stays in play until it's done, for heaven's sake. So that's my 1 point. The second point is there's a huge loophole within this recalling a state official, because it says distinctly that 25% of the people who voted in the election for which that official was elected that live in this county, in this state, should be able to sign the recall and their signature be validated. And what was set up by the Secretary of State was, if you didn't live in the same county in which you voted in 2020, they dropped your signature. Outrageous. It's a state election, state signatures. The state was claiming, they couldn't verify the signatures because the county was the one that had to verify the signatures. And if you move from county to county, well, that was just too much and the Secretary of State's office couldn't handle it. But that's their job. Huge loophole. I don't see it addressed here in this regulation at all. And that is the end of my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crump. I appreciate your comments. Mr. Schrader, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Flashman. Thank you very much. I just trying to be momentarily helpful to one of the previous commenters. The lists of previous election voters, as in those voters who voted in a particular election at which someone was elected that you want to recall, are absolutely public records and would be available from your city or county clerk. I don't think from the Secretary of State. That's not something the Secretary of State's office would maintain, but the county clerk's office would absolutely have those lists.
Thank you, that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Trigger. Appreciate the comments. Do you have, is that it?
Yes, thank you, Mark. I'm just trying to be helpful.
Very much appreciate it. Ms. White, do you have an additional comment or?
I'm sorry, I forgot to take the hand down.
No worries. Thank you. At this time, is there any other public comment regarding proposed regulation R083-21? Perfect. At this time, then I will close public comment regarding proposed regulation R083-21 and open public comment on proposed regulation R084-21. Okay. Existing law authorizes the Secretary of State to adopt regulations relating to campaign practices and recall elections. Existing law requires a committee for the recall of a public officer to register with the Secretary of State. Existing law defines committee for the recall of a public officer as an organization that, one, receives any contributions, makes any contribution to candidates or persons, or makes any expenditures that are designed to affect the recall of a public officer, or two, files a notice of intent to circulate a petition for the recall of a public officer. Section 1 of this regulation establishes the deadline for the registration of any such committee by requiring the committee to register with the Secretary of State not later than 10 days after the filing of the notice of intent. Existing law provides that before a petition for the recall of a public officer is circulated, the persons proposing to circulate the petition must file a notice of intent to circulate the petition. Section 2 of this regulation requires a copy of the proposed petition to recall a public officer to be filed with the Secretary of State on the same day that the notice of intent is filed with the filing officer. Further, Section 2 prohibits the proposed petition from being circulated until both the notice of intent and a copy of the proposed petition are filed. The Nevada Constitution and existing law set forth various requirements relating to the contents of a petition to recall a public officer, including, without limitation, the requirement that the petition contain a description not exceeding 200 words of the reason why the recall is demanded. Section 2 requires that the copy of the proposed petition filed with the Secretary of State meet such constitutional and statutory requirements. Sections 3 to 5 of this regulation update various internal references in order to conform with existing provisions of the Nevada Rise statutes. At this time, if there's anybody interested in making public comment regarding proposed regulation R084-21, please go ahead and indicate so now. Mr. Williams, please.
Hello, thank you. R084 is somewhat similar to R083 in that it does not enable voting, lower cost of elections, or since it has, an impact on elected officials, I really think it would be best if like the legislature or the governor handled this. There's no reason for this reg at this time. Wait for the 2023 legislature and let them sort this one out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. White. Ms. White, do you have comments?
Yes, I'm sorry, clicked the wrong unmute. I don't understand why this thing is necessary in the first place. What is it fixing that's not in the state code right now? I mean, every time I see a number, not later than 10 days, that's putting a restriction on it, making it more difficult. What was it before? Or why do you need this 10 days added?
Again, this is a clarifying regulation to make sure that folks understand that when they submit a notice of intent for the recall of a public officer, that there previously hadn't been a necessary timeline associated with when that 200-word description had to be submitted. And so it created a possibility where an organization could file a notice of intent, fill their statutory requirements, go around and then solicit signatures for that notice of recall, perhaps with more than 200 words as part of their description and explanation. So that, again, this is really combining them together so that notice of intent and the description, that 200-word description, again, is now going to be submitted at the same time. So that way it's associated together so that, again, the concern is, suppose you, Ms. White, were an elected official, someone went around with an 800-word explanation about why you needed to be recalled, that this is making sure that it keeps that to the 200-word requirement and that we're able to make sure that it's filed appropriately.
Okay, so why could it not be 30 days and why could it not be 500 words? 200 words is very, very minimal. I mean, to get people to sign something, they're going to want more detail than that. So why not 30 days and why not 500 words?
That is in the Constitution, unfortunately, the 200-word requirement. So if you want to change that requires a different process than.
Okay, good to know. In the 30 days, is that a possibility?
So extending it 30 days, again, is more or less where we're at right now, where, again, it opens the opportunity for individuals to use more than 200 words, even though there's a statutory requirement to have it as just 200.
So why limit it? Every time you get a regulation, it's more limiting, more restrictive, more difficult. Why are we limiting it?
Again, the intent here isn't to limit or restrict it. It's simply to make sure that the compliance is done in a timely manner.
Well, that's saying the same thing you said before. It's limiting and it's restricting. I mean, compliance, make it 30 days.
Yes, ma'am. I understand your comments. I'll make the note, the recommendation to extend it to 30 days, and we'll take it into consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fisher, good morning.
Good morning, Mary Fisher, Nye County. And I just want to make sure that I understand that this regulation was written by the Legislative Commission. You posted just a short while ago on the chat column. And so that this was actually proposed by the Legislative Commission. And if you could just answer that, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. To be clear, no, the Legislative Commission did not draft or develop this idea. This was, again, something that here in the Elections Division, as again, one of the primary organizations that receives and reviews and provides feedback and works closely with the individuals interested in conducting the initiative and referendum processes. That this was something that we developed. Again, as you I think are aware, it will go in front of the Legislative Commission. So they will absolutely, again, have input on this. And if the concerns is that it's too limiting, I encourage you to express that to your representatives. But no, they did not draft it.
So, okay, so so who drafted it? You drafted it, and who else?
This one, Troy, actually.
Troy?
Used to work back there. He actually left the agency just a little bit ago, so I won't go into any of his details right now. But again, a member of the Secretary of State's Elections Division, as part of our 12-month review of our regulations. And then after that, it went to a legal review, so there was some further input on it as well.
And the legal review was done by attorneys from where?
A combination of two locations, Office of the Attorney General and the Legislative Council Bureau.
Of Nevada?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, I should apologize. So Troy worked for the Nevada Secretary of State, just to make sure that that's clear too.
Okay,
But
thank
yes.
you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. At this time, is there any other public comment regarding proposed regulation R084-21? Okay, this time I will close public comment regarding proposed regulation R084-21, and I will open the workshop on R110-21. Existing law requires the Secretary of State to adopt regulations for conducting a risk limiting audit of an election. Existing law also, one, requires the Secretary of State to develop a pilot program for conducting a risk limiting audit of the 2022 general election, and two, authorizes the Secretary of State to require each county clerk to participate in the pilot program and conduct a risk limiting audit. This regulation, one, requires that certain county clerks conduct a risk limiting audit of the 2022 primary election. Two, requires that all county clerks conduct a risk limiting audit of the 2022 general election. And three, sets forth certain requirements that apply to any risk limiting audit conducted of the 2022 primary or 2022 general election. Again, this all relates back to NRS 293-394. If you're interested in reviewing the statute that defines and requires the conduct of risk limiting audits. But at this time, if there's anybody interested in providing public comment regarding proposed regulation R110-21, please go ahead and indicate so at this time. Mr. Williams, please.
Hello, thank you. All I can do is object to risk limiting audits. I know it's not really going anywhere, but we need an audit board with real powers and tools to do real audits, and the risk limiting audit, without going and wasting your time, because I'm sure other people are going to line up and tear it apart. I just object. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Hindle, please.
Thank you, Mark. Again, Jim Hindle, Vice Chair of the Nevada Republican Party. The National Conference of State Legislatures defines a risk limit as the largest chance that the audit will fail to detect and correct an incorrectly reported outcome. For example, Colorado's first risk limiting audit had a risk limit of 9%, which meant that there was a 91% chance that the audit would correct an incorrect outcome if the outcome was wrong. The risk limit is often set in administrative rule by the state or county, often conducting the audit. Therefore, proposed regulation R110-21P has a risk limit set at 5%. Nevada often has very close and contested elections. Because of this, the risk limiting audit, or the RLA, should be moved to 1%, given that often our margins deciding an election are very, very close, especially in our rural counties. In Section 7, mechanical ballot comparison is listed as an option. We would recommend that in-person ballot counting or ballot polling be the only method for audit. This proposed regulation fails to have any note on the composition of election workers participating in an audit. As mentioned before, we strongly support a mandated proportionate partisan split, 1/3 Democrat, 1/3 Republican, 1/3 nonpartisan, being required by this regulation for the workers participating in the audit. Finally, this does not include any provision for public observation of the risk limiting audit. Not only should the timeline for this be required to be posted to the public, but full observation of the process by voters should be enthusiastically welcomed by election officials. And maybe one last note is that, I believe that the proposal has that it will be selected in only one race for the audit. And we would very strongly ask that that be looked at and expanded to at least some proportionate number of races across a ballot in order to have a statistical comparison to make sure that the operation is running appropriately and that we are minimizing the risk of any unintended outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hindle. I appreciate your comments. We'll certainly take those into consideration. And just for awareness, again, the pilots continue. Mr. Sackerson may not have realized it, but we just did another pilot risk limiting audit in Elko County that concluded yesterday, I believe. So again, it is a new process. This is something that the Elections Division, the Secretary of State's Elections Division, along with the county clerks and registrars, have been continuing to look at pilots, continuing to do research on to make sure that we understand the best practices and identifying everything from storage procedures, right? When you have a number of mail ballots and other ballots that are submitted, making sure that you can retrieve them appropriately to conduct this audit. That work does continue. Thank you for your comments. So, Mr. Watson, good morning.
Good morning. For the record, Alex Watson, the RNC's Election Integrity Director. We do have some concerns with R110-21P, particularly in Section 1, subsection 7. Our concern is that a risk limit set at 5% is too great a risk factor. In many states, it's 0.5% is the margin to trigger an automatic recount. While the RNC recognizes this is simply an assessment, it must set an appropriate risk factor so that the audit can limit any potential risks during the election. Moreover, the results of these risk limiting audits should be shared with the public through the Secretary of State's website with the detailed results for each county. Based on that, we propose the following changes as follows. Quote, for the purpose of conducting risk limiting audits pursuant to the section, the Secretary of State, A, will require the risk limiting audit software with the risk limit set to 1%, and B, may designate one or more of the following types of audits. 1, ballot comparison, 2, ballot polling, or 3, a hybrid of ballot comparison and ballot collection. Additionally, we would like added within 15 days following the completion of a risk limiting audit conducted pursuant to the section, the county clerk shall remit to the Secretary of State the results of such audit, and the Secretary of State shall, within 10 days of receiving the information from the county clerk, post the results of the audits on the Secretary of State's website. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Mr. Comp, good morning.
Good Morning, thank you. Mark Camp, for the record, candidate for Nye County Clerk, Republican. If you look at section 1, subsection 7, item B, it says that the may designate one or more of the following types of audit methods: ballot comparison, ballot polling, or hybrid method. My concern with that is this is only making sure that what appears on the machine and looking at the ballots themselves have been either filled out correctly and that they match what is in the system. I recommend that this also includes, if possible, within the limits of the law, that a canvas be added to that of either all of those ballots or a proportion of those ballots, so that we can verify that the ballot was actually submitted by the person who submitted that ballot, that they agree with the results of that ballot, and that they know that they can verify that there's been no other person who submitted that ballot on their behalf. Thank you for listening to that.
Thank you, Mr. Camp. I appreciate your comments. We'll take it into consideration. Mr. Sackerson, please. Good morning.
Good morning. Again, for the record, Ralph Sackerson, Elko County. Pursuant to section 7, subsection A, I would ask that we change the risk limit to 0.5%. The 5% is just simply too high. Maybe I have done too much QA, QC work across the course of my career, but 5% is too high. I also concur strongly with what Jim Hindle said, in that it should be in-person audits with public observation. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Sackerson. I appreciate your comments. We'll definitely take into consideration. Ms. Fisher, good morning.
Thank you, Mary Fisher, Nye County voter poll observer. I have a question. It's where it says requires the Secretary of State to develop a pilot program for conducting a risk limiting audit of the 2022 general election. Is that, are the people who will be involved with the pilot program required that the Secretary of State is going to put together this pilot program? Is it just for the elected clerks of each county?
Yes, ma'am. So I guess it doesn't really clarify here. It does talk a little bit more in the statute. But when you think of a risk limiting audit, this is not a process that is conducted. It is the clerks. The clerks and registrars are the ones that conduct the risk limiting audit.
It won't be any lay person. No lay persons would be there, or community people.
They may be assisted by their staff to do it. They may have, depending on the scope of the requirement, there is, as part of the process and what we're doing in the current pilots and what we have done in the current pilots that we conducted both in the elections in 2020 as well as the elections in 2021 that I suspect maybe some of you weren't even aware occurred, but we did not only other elections but also pilot RLAs. Is as part of the process, people have to go to certain locations to get information and bring it back. So the clerks will be assisted in various capacities, but primarily by their staff, while the clerk is standing there watching the entire time. This is not a process that they go off and focus on something else. It's important, it's complex, but they absolutely provide the oversight. And moving forward in regards to the public observation, again, 100% agree that there's not one single clerk or registrar in the state, nor the Secretary of State or anybody here in the Elections Division that thinks that this should be a secret, hidden process. Totally transparent, absolutely. So I appreciate your comments in that regard.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. White, please.
Yeah, and just to confirm, can the candidate, him or herself, and or representatives that they choose, be in person to observe the process up close, not 20 feet away?
Again, don't see why not. I think the observation requirements are likely the same as it would be for a recount. So again, it probably depends the location in county to county, but to the best of their ability to see this process. Certainly encourage folks, if you haven't done a little bit of research on what a risk limiting audit is, encourage you to do so. It's a statistical analysis. They are a bit of a complex process. And it's good to understand, even the terms used earlier that are included in here about, ballot comparison, understanding what that is, what those processes are like. Certainly encourage folks to look into them so that there's no misinformation or confusion about them going forward. But yes, ma'am, specific to your question, candidates observed, yes.
Okay, and I agree with somebody who spoke previously about why just one race. There might be a very hot race, and if an individual or whatever not in that race, it just seems like it could avoid addressing the race that is concerning the constituency. And so if you have maybe more than one, it would alleviate some of that possibly.
Yes, ma'am, and I understand your concerns, and this is in addition to all the other things that currently exist in statute and regulation regarding the conduct of election challenges. So this is simply another thing on top to verify, just another type of audit. In addition to the pre-election, the during election audits, and the post-election audits that are conducted. These are very time intensive as well, which is part of the concern. We've talked to individuals in other states who have done them, or have done them at least for a little bit of time. That seems to be one of the concerns, because the questions that come up, well, why not just do 100% risk limit? Why wouldn't I just make it 100%? Well, that 100% risk limiting audit is a full recount, and that we have that option available through statute already. And then the question about why not do every single race on the ballot, and again, it's a very time intensive process. Part of the intent in doing these pilots too, by the way, just to clarify that, is so that the clerks and their staffs can gain experience. And again, as I talked about, even the organization of storage and materials is extremely important for something like this. So by doing these pilots, it's showing the clerks, and in fact, the one we did in Elko just over the last 2 days, it was watched by, we set it up with a similar Zoom type process as this, so that clerks in other counties, I think we had 12 other counties have been paying attention as well. And again, they pay attention, they ask questions, they try to, again, learn and identify ways they can improve their processes. Because the goal, of course, is to try to get these done before the county certifies the election, right? Like it's much more reassuring to know that we've done the RLA, and the commissioners are able to then certify that county election, knowing that yes, the risk is the ballots reflect the will of the voters. So that there's a lot of, again, competing factors that we're looking at. And imagine from a clerk's point of view, again, if you haven't spent time in a clerk's office approaching or even after election day, they've got to draft the documents that to present to the Board of County Commissioners. There's the processing that we've talked about now, receiving mail ballots 4 days after the election, curing signatures up to 6 days after the election. So there's still ballots that are being reviewed, signatures being reviewed, massive efforts to contact voters to confirm, is this your signature? We need to know that this ballot will not get cast. All of these activities are going on. And now additionally, a risk limiting audit, while concurrently addressing the fact that, again, the truth is, in many counties, the commissioners may want to certify fairly quickly, but recognizing that also we have that provisional comparison process where we have to get everyone's provisional ballots at the state and make sure that no one tried to vote more than once across county lines. All of these things are competing, and the clerks by this point have been going at full steam, well before early voting. We talked about yesterday and previously the written challenge process that's 2 weeks before early voting. That's going to intensify the before election activities all the way up through early voting, all the way up to election day, and now even after the election day. So that while many candidates really consider election day being kind of the end of the marathon, with the clerks, registrars, and their staffs, it is not. So that these are all I'm telling you again, just to simply highlight what a risk limiting audit is. An RLA, it's quick and easy to say, but it's complex and it can be taxing in its characteristics. So it continues to be something we're looking at.
Thank you for all those details, but I just want to emphasize, if you want to know what the best practices are for risk limiting audits, do not go to California. And two, the scanning, a risk limiting audit is just rescanning the ballots, if I understand that correctly. And so if you have garbage in, you get garbage out. If you have bad ballots going in, you got bad results coming out. And you're mentioning that this is increasing the amount of work that the clerks are having to do. Well, what this is doing is it's intensifying the pressure that they have to meet a timeline, a deadline. And so if you're not going to extend the deadline for when they have to certify, then what you're doing is you're making everything that has to be done before the certification, you're making that more at risk for rushing through an inaccurate work.
Yes, ma'am. Those deadlines are, again, in statute. That this is not something the Secretary of State has the ability to adjust. They're tied to very specific requirements. In many cases in the Constitution and statutes, when the commissioners have to certify no later than the 10th day after the election, in which, by the way, right, like the commissioners have to certify no later than 10 days after the election. Do you think that our phones are not going to explode the day after the election because people haven't certified? Waiting 10 days for certification already is a bit much for some voters, and they call and let us know that, rightly so. So please understand, again, these are statutory and constitutional requirements that we're doing our best to meet. While the clerks recognize this is extra work, they also recognize that any opportunity to increase voter confidence through an additional audit or process is worth it. Absolutely. At the end of the day. So that's part of the reason why they're trying to balance, figuring out the right way to do it going forward.
Well, if they have 15 jobs to complete within that 10-day period, you need to remove something because you're adding something very big in here. Something has to be removed because what we're doing is we're condensing so many things that have to get done by 10 days, and something's going to suffer. Quality is going to suffer. And I agree with the 0.5 limit. 5% is ridiculous. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. Ms. Fisher, please.
Yeah, just a quick comment. The agitators, I know that there are probably agitators, Republican ones that call the Secretary of State, and but there are things in place that tell the Republicans, poll observers, to follow the rules and the regulations, and we have training, and we are told not to agitate, or we are not told not to agitate. It's just a given that, so anyway, I just wanted to just say that. I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comment. At this time, is there any other public comment relating to proposed regulation R110-21? If not, I'll go ahead and close public comment regarding R110-21 and open the workshop on R11-21, 111-21. Existing law authorizes the Board of County Commissioners of any county to purchase and adopt for use at elections any mechanical voting system and mechanical recording device. That's in NRS 293D.105. A mechanical voting system is a system of voting whereby a voter may cast a vote, one, on a device which mechanically or electronically compiles a total of the number of votes cast for each candidate, and for or against each measure voted on, or two, by marking a paper ballot, which is subsequently counted on an electronic tabulator, counting device, or computer. Existing regulations require the county clerk in a county to use a mechanical voting system to conduct certain tests before and after each election to ensure that each mechanical recording device, which directly records votes electronically, will accurately record the votes cast for all offices and on all measures. Section 2 of this regulation requires that the county clerk also test each ballot marking device, which is defined in Section 1 of this regulation as a device that allows a registered voter to mark a paper ballot, which is subsequently counted on an electronic tabulator, counting device, or computer. Existing regulations require that before each election cycle for federal office, each county clerk is required to certify that the operating systems installed on each mechanical recording device have been certified by the Voting System Certification and Laboratory Accreditation Program of the Election Assistance Commission. Section 3 of this regulation, 1, updates the name of the program in relevant citation to federal law, and 2, requires the county clerk to also certify the operating systems installed on each ballot marking device. Section 3 requires these certifications to be done before each election. One last thing I'd like to comment on regards to proposed regulation R111-21 is to really highlight that what this is talking about is to make sure that the regulations that previously had covered Dominion machines across 16 of our 17 counties also do apply to those counties not using Dominion machines. This gets into a little bit of the discussion about, and that's part of the reason why I want to clarify the difference between a ballot marking device and a direct recording equipment, a DRE, and a BMD style voting system. These are things that, again, if you're not aware of the differences, I encourage you to either reach out, elect at sos.nv.gov, or alternatively, you can Google it, I guess. It does pop up pretty quickly, and it provides some good explanations. But a ballot marking device, those are the type of systems currently in use in Carson City and now in Lander County. And I know there's some discussion about potentially them being expanded to other counties. But so this, again, ensures that they have the same requirements that previously had applied elsewhere. If at this time anybody is interested in providing public comment on proposed regulation R111-21, please go ahead and indicate so at this time. Mr. Graffenreid, please.
Thank you. Again, for the record, my name is Jim DeGraffenreid, and I am Nevada's Republican National Committee man. We submitted written comments on R111 along with the other regs under consideration today, but I wanted to add some further explanation for some of that testimony in this forum. Elections are regular events planned well in advance. It seems reasonable to require that voting machines and all associated devices complete the testing process at least 2 weeks prior to an election, and that the public is able to observe these tests. The regulation as written would allow the testing to be delayed until the end of the day prior to early voting. We recommend changing the language in Section 2, subsection 1 to require testing of mechanical devices to take place not earlier than 4 weeks before and not later than 2 weeks before the first day of early voting. If this is not corrected, a test could conceivably be conducted after ballots had already started being counted. In Section 3, subsection 1 regarding timelines for testing tabulation software and operating systems, we recommend the same requirement to begin testing 4 weeks in advance and complete it no later than 2 weeks before early voting. Additionally, the majority of our county commissions have approved Dominion voting systems for use in their counties. Because several other states that also use Dominion have reported improper instances of external programs being installed on voting machines, such as Microsoft SSMS, we recommend including language in Section 3 to prohibit any software outside of the approved and tested voting systems from being present on a voting machine or mechanical recording device. If any such software is found to be present on any device, that device must be sequestered for an independent bipartisan forensic audit. Finally, in Section 4, in the interest of transparency, we recommend adding an additional subsection that mandates the audit trail be proactively published for at least 90 days via posting and electronic posting, including names and detailed timestamps for who accessed the mechanical recording devices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeGraffenreid. Appreciate your comments with that and taken into consideration. Ms. White, please.
3.1, I don't understand how any of the machines or systems can be certified if you cannot scrutinize the source code. I'm not sure what the certifiers are looking at, but if they can't see that, I don't know how they can say that the machines are safe. And then 3.1b, 3.1b says, has been certified by the Voting System Testing and Certification Program of the Election Assistance Commission. So is the Gambling Commission part of that? I mean, is there a certification process they go through with the EAC to become eligible to do the testing, the certification? And if so, I mean, it seems like each county should know who is actually certifying it, which entity. And then 3.4a, I don't want to know the supervisor's name. I mean, that would be okay. But I would like to know the actual person who had their hands on that machine or accessed the code and at what time, and their position and why they have the skills. I mean, I just want to know who's actually touching it, and absolutely should not be anybody related to the system manufacturer. And then having one person do it, that's probably not a good idea either. You need multiple or bipartisan, tripartisan access to it. And I'm sure you understand that there's huge distrust of these systems. So any place that you can add additional oversight would help, but specifically 3.1, I don't understand how they can certify something they can't see. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. Just for everyone's awareness too, I'm going to throw into the chat the link to the EAC's voting systems test laboratories. A series of other links on there as well for your review and again, future discussion if you ever have any questions on it. But the voting system guidelines, the certification process, those are the companies that they have on there, ProVND and SLI compliance. Those are two of them that again are available for use. And these can be requested at the county level too. There are counties across the nation that have requested these VISTLs to get involved and do. Yesterday I mentioned it, but I'll mention it again. There's emission tests that some of these do, these companies, where they post like wavelength monitors around voting machines, and then again turn them on, cycle them through, go through mock elections or even during real elections, and they can tell you exactly what comes out, what signals are emitted or received. So it would tell, for example, there's the county unsecured Bluetooth or Wi-Fi rather is on over, kind of that way in that building that is not connected. But in regards to like what's coming out of a machine, to confirm or at least address that concern. But again, the VISTL guidelines is in there as well.
Thank you for that, but I'm still waiting to hear an answer of why you can certify a machine that you can't see what's happening with the software, the code.
The certification, including software, again, has gone under extensive review before it ever gets even considered by the Secretary of State for inclusion or use during a Nevada election.
No, I'm going to have to disagree with you. The code is proprietary. They don't let anybody see it. So how can that be certified?
Ma'am, it's slightly out of the scope of these regulations. I hope sincerely that you'll reach out and we can talk about the certification process, and we can go through very detailed explanation and discussion about that. There's a number of folks that I can pull into that conversation with you that we can, I think, absolutely provide almost painful clarity on the state, the EAC state and county level certifications that occur. It includes a full review of the code and the scripts and the mechanical device themselves and the hardware, not just looking for what's there, but what is not there to make sure that things aren't being added inappropriately.
Okay, so to clarify, you're telling me that the source code is not proprietary, they're not keeping it private, that we have access to 100% of all the code used in these machine systems?
No, I'm not saying that at all, not even remotely. I'm saying that there's a review that is done prior to these systems being approved through the existing EAC and state certification processes.
I'm a little familiar with the review that happens, and they take just the word of the manufacturer. Until we can look at it ourselves, taking the word of the manufacturer is not sufficient. They should not be certified in the first place. So yes, maybe we do need to set up a meeting with some experts, and I know some people who are actual experts in this who would attend with me. Maybe we can help you understand what the issue is with these machines. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White. Mr. Watson, please.
All right, thank you. For the record, Alex Watson, the RNC's Election Integrity Director. Of course, we've submitted our concerns with R111-21P through written comment. However, we do find it important to also voice our concerns over public comment as well. The RNC's concern, particularly with Section 2, subsection 1, is that under the proposed wording, a clerk is not required to run any tests on a mechanical recording device until the day before the first day of early voting. If the testing is not completed sufficiently in advance of early voting, then the options for remedying any issues is significantly limited. Rather, this period should be expanded to ensure testing is done and there is sufficient time to remedy any issues prior to early voting. Moreover, the results from all such testing should be reported to the Secretary of State, and thereafter, the results of such testing should be posted on the county website and on the Secretary of State's website. We propose the subsection be changed to reflect the following: quote, not earlier than 2 weeks before and not later than 1 week before the first day of early voting and within 10 days after each election, as provided in NRS 293B.140 to 293B.170. Additionally, we would like added, quote, within 1 day following the receipt of the results of the testing required by this section, the county clerk shall submit the results of such testing to the Secretary of State, and both the county clerk and the Secretary of State shall post on their respective websites the results of such testing not later than 3 days prior to the first day of early voting and within 3 days after receiving such results after the election, after each election. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. I appreciate your comments. At this time, is there anybody else interested in providing public comment regarding proposed regulation R111-21? Okay, thank you. If not, then I'll close public comment regarding proposed regulation R111-21. And we'll open the workshop on proposed regulation R112-21. Existing law authorizes the Board of County Commissioners of any county to purchase and adopt for use at elections any mechanical voting system. A mechanical voting system is a system of voting whereby a voter may cast a vote, one, on a device which mechanically or electronically compiles a total of the number of votes cast for each candidate, and for or against each measure voted on, or two, by marking a paper ballot which is subsequently counted on an electronic tabulator, counting device, or computer. This regulation provides that not later than 180 days before each election, the Secretary of State will prepare and send to each county clerk of a county that will use a mechanical voting system for the election a report that sets forth the official title for each race that will be on the ballot. This regulation further requires the county clerk to ensure that the mechanical voting system used in the county uses the official title set forth in the report for each race that is on the ballot. This time, if anybody is interested in providing public comment regarding proposed regulation R112-21, please go ahead and indicate so now. Oh, Mr. Williams, please.
Hi, I could be stealthy. I just object to this reg in its entirety, against electronic voting. Paper ballots, in person, precinct level, hand counting of ballots, proper audit board with the tools and the funding and the authority to do real audits. It's a basket of things. You got your basket. I understand that what's been happening in the legislature, and I hope that we can right this ship. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Williams. Is there anybody interested in providing public comment regarding proposed regulation R112-21? Okay, this time we'll close public comment regarding proposed regulation R112-21. At this time, we will open the final general public comment. Again, this is public comment on items not previously discussed or on the agenda. If there's anybody interested in providing public comment on any matters other than the previously listed LCB file numbers of the proposed regulations, please go ahead and indicate so now at this time. Ms. Guerrero, good morning.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Matilda Guerrero. I just wanted to take some time to thank Mr. Voloshin and the rest of Secretary Stupkowski's team for being communicable, making themselves open to the public by answering questions thoroughly and wanting to meet with community members, and for investigating every alleged claim of voter fraud. It's great to see that the legislature passed provisions to mandate our election officials to go through an annual forensic signature verification training. And for the record, I just wanted to state that per Nellis, Assembly Bill 121 passed the Senate unanimously, so that means both Republican and Democratic senators.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Guerrero. Mr. Williams, please.
Hello, I want to talk about NRS 293D.200 because this NRS applies to covered persons, and some of the regs in AB 121 are trying to add disabled persons, and they cite this NRS in regards to disabled persons. But I have some problems. For example, on section 3, it says, and I just think this wording is particularly vague. The Secretary of State shall develop standardized absentee voting materials, including without limitation, privacy and transmission envelopes and their electronic equivalents. This must be the PDF, the ballot PDF that you showed us, right? Because what is a transmission envelope and what are electronic equivalents? It's not clear, it's not spelled out. So, did you get my question?
Yes, sir, Ms. Williams. And again, if you're looking to discuss the specifics of the ease process, we did cover that slightly during the meeting earlier today.
Okay, well,
again,
this is ease. Okay, let's see, but it could be spelled out better. Why doesn't it just say the state's, voting portal? That would be nice, but it's just a little, I just thought it was vague. Okay, moving on. Tell me if this is correct. It says section 103 of the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Voting Act, 52 U.S.C. 20303. I went there. I didn't see section 103. Maybe I'm just an idiot, or maybe there's a problem with this when it says section 103. Could you clarify that for me, please?
I'm sorry, sir. I don't understand the question.
Well, if you go to 52 U.S.C. 20303 at uscode.house.gov, I don't see a section 103. I mean, I may be missing something. I'm just asking a question, sir.
Perhaps you could talk about it after this the meeting, simply just so that, again, not on the agenda, but I can help find the information you're looking for, certainly.
Well, it's for your benefit, sir. You cite 20303, but really it's a basket of things that go from 20301 to 20311, and it would behoove you maybe to say sections 20301 to 20311 inclusive. Just a thought, added some better language for you. There is no declaration when you say, there must be a declaration by the voter that I could find at 52 U.S.C. 20303, but you might be thinking of 20302. And it says here, the state requires an oath or affirmation to accompany any document under this chapter. Use the standard oath prescribed by the presidential designee, that's a military person for you other laymen like me, under section 20301B7 of this title. So that's what I believe you're referring to in terms of declaration, and that's in 20302, not 20303. Last point. The following is confusing phrasing, and for those of you who don't know, this section of NRS 293D.200 has to do with the pre-registration of a 17-year-old that is not in the country. And this is what it says. 6B. The last place where a parent or legal guardian of the person was, or under this chapter would have been, eligible to vote before leaving the United States is within the state. I've read it 4 or 5 times. I'm still kind of going, the last place within the state of a parent or legal guardian, and then you're going to let the 17-year-old pre-register? I'm having a hard time with that. Maybe you could elaborate on what this is intended. I think it's bad. I think there's something wrong here that could be a part of your adoption hearing or something. Okay, thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Again, without having a chance to review all those the laws that you just recited, I probably butcher my response pretty badly. So you have my email. Again, perhaps more than willing to converse with you about it separately. But thank you.
I do intend on writing you. I have not written to you. I've been collaborating with Mr. Beatles on that stuff, but I haven't actually personally put my thoughts down to paper for you, and I intend to do so, but it may not be till Monday, if that's okay.
I have a significant amount to read and review over the weekend already relating to these regulations and to consider so that I can prepare my thoughts for the Secretary Sagaski next week. So yes, sir. If it's not till Monday, I understand.
Very well, thank you. And I will be far more clear and informed by that time, so I won't say silly, stupid stuff anymore. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Hindle, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Velashin. And again, I want to commend the process that you have established here and followed, your openness and the basis for this whole hearing for you to get input. You've been very good at moving us along, and clearly there is a lot of input, as you said, to both read and digest as you've gone through this. So I just want to make sure that everybody here understands that while these processes are painful, your dedication to this and your going through it and being very respectful and listening to all of us is much appreciated. Clearly, we from the Republican Party here in Nevada have expressed a lot of concerns and a lot of recommendations for changes. We know you're going to take those seriously, but it's not just Republicans. I think we express, or hopefully we're expressing the issue that all of us, citizens, voters in Nevada, want to have confidence in the integrity of our election systems. This is not a partisan issue. And I think, again, by the attendance in these meetings, the concern and the interest, I know you've taken, but it does show that across the state, people want to know that with the changes in our election system, that there is integrity being put back in it. And again, these hearings are going to go a long way to help you put good language in there to help people feel more confident. It's never going to be perfect. That's why the verification, again, we don't trust anyone. You got to verify. And so if we can keep that in mind as you go through the language to make sure that it's as tight as possible, that's much appreciated. Thank you very much, Mark, and we look forward to the product of all these discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Hindo. Appreciate your comments and time over the last few days. Ms. White, please.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if you can help me understand what I would need to do, who I need to contact. I would like to have a written response from the Secretary of State where she lists all of the information or facts as she sees them that makes her comfortable in certifying the machines. So how would I go about getting that?
There's a number of ways, frankly, ma'am. You can either emailing nvelect@sos.nv.gov. I'll put that into the chat as well. But if you start there, or even again, if it's more of a records request, provide that to our public information officer, and I'll put her email in here as well. Starting there, again, and we'll provide again whatever information the secretary and the PIR are able to provide to you to help satisfy your question.
Okay, and then secondly, I just want to apologize for any intensity that I may have communicated. I'm sure there are lots of us who feel very strongly about this, and it was not a personal attack on you. I just am very frustrated by the process and by what we're seeing unfold across the country, given our last election. So thank you for your effort and time and patience. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, and no need to apologize. Again, all of us on the call today and that have been involved in the written notifications or in any phone call, frankly, that I've been able to, again, frankly, have the privilege to answer over the last, year and 2 months that I've been the deputy for elections. All the people that call, provide questions and get involved are clearly passionate. And again, it's a matched passion here as well. So I completely understand. Do not take anything personally, and I'm here to help support. I know that the answers that I provide oftentimes aren't satisfactory as I explain the laws or the processes as they are conducted at the state and county levels. But again, I'm not going to sugarcoat something. I'm not going to certainly lie. Simply present things as they are to help inform folks of what's going on. At the very least, I think to myself that when I do so, and when folks are passionate at me in some cases, the answers I'm providing hopefully will help shape their responses in guidance that they provide to their representatives and legislators, or to future regulatory type processes such as these. But again, I do appreciate truly your involvement and understand and your comments over the last few days. Thank you. Mr. Watson, please.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for holding these hearings. I just had a quick clarifying question. I believe you had discussed or talked about it earlier. I just may have missed it in my notes. When the adoption hearings are taking place with the Legislative Commission, who would be the tie-breaking vote if the commission is split in their decision?
And so I don't have any visibility on the legislative commission's internal processes for the tie breaking. Either it doesn't come up as a cop out, but I think anything I say would be a guess. I just threw the link to the staff. It has a few points of contact to the directors of the director's office there, the legislative commission. I believe they'd be able to handle or address your question without speculation and be able to tell you more clearly the answer. Does that help?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right, at this time, is there any other public comment relating to an item not on the previously discussed on the agenda?
Yes, please.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. White, please.
Please provide the links where we can find the recordings, and not the general one, but a specific one.
Yes, I will. So currently what we do, the email address I just included to the SOSPIO, that's our public information officer. Again, I realized yesterday was 5 hours of video that as soon as we're done and I hit end, it does this conversion to a video file. That process yesterday took closer to about 45 minutes. So if you give us about an hour and then email the SOSPIO, she'll provide to you a link, a very specific link for all 3 days of regulatory videos. And also along those lines, for everyone's awareness, you can ask for the chat as well. And I think she even includes the chat as part of that. So there's a text file that you can read down and either get email addresses or reference links and those sorts of things as well. But yes, ma'am, the SOSPIO has got that right now. In time, the plan is that we're working on this a little bit right now, though, again, as I might have mentioned, we're a little understaffed, so there's some timing concerns, but I'm going to have this uploaded and have these links put onto our website in due course, but in the immediate future, reaching out to the PIO, Mrs. Jennifer Russell, she'll be able to provide these video links to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Perfect. Okay, at this time, if there's no other public comment relating to items not on the agenda, again, I do want to let you know that I talked to the secretary again this morning and each morning before these workshops and as well as afterwards. I let her know that there is excellent involvement, that people are involved, providing excellent feedback. We discussed a couple of the ideas already that she asked me to review further. So I've got my homework for the weekend, but she does truly appreciate your involvement in this process. These are 3 workshops. We have another workshop coming up on February 4th. We have 2 adoption hearings on February 2nd and 3rd. And then we have another adoption hearing on February 22nd. All of those, again, are continued discussions, but not the finish line. The finish line, so to speak, is the Legislative Commission. Again, when that meeting is identified, the Legislative Commission will publicly notice it appropriately. So again, if you're unable to attend either one of the adoption hearings, then I would encourage you to try to attend the Legislative Commission, or maybe even talk to your representatives or the representatives on the commission in advance to provide your concerns. And then lastly, just to reiterate what I mentioned early on, in case anybody missed it, this regulatory review process is now part of, at least while I'm still in this position, part of our rhythm, so to speak, of the biennium. Starting in December, we're going to begin a holistic, again, review of our regulations going forward. Some of the ones that again, maybe seemed less important to you than others, we're part of that holistic approach. So again, we'll start that in December. It will go through the legislative session. Following the legislative session of 2023, we'll again do a similar type review, more focused specifically on regulations relating to any past legislation that's elections related, of course. And then we'll begin a similar process such as this with workshops and adoption hearings, ideally starting sometime closer to the fall of 2023. Again, I'm letting you know that it may sound a bit weird for me to encourage you to mark your calendars on something that's over a year out. But again, from an elections point of view, there are things that we're frantically, and frantic isn't the right word, aggressively and very deliberately working on now in the very close, in the near future. But we have a long-term plan as well to continue the progression that, again, you all have been very instrumental in being part of to make sure that Nevada elections continue to be safe and secure and fair. It's a process. There will be further changes, but if you certainly come up with anything between now in the fall of 2023, I encourage you to provide that to MD Elect. We'll capture your comments and again, hold on to them for future discussion. But otherwise, again, if there's any further questions, I look forward to Mr. Williams. I can talk to you about the Elections Integrity Task Force separately. It's okay. But otherwise, again, I truly appreciate your time. Secretary Sagaski appreciates your involvement in the process, and I look forward to our future discussions going forward. Thank you again, and I look forward to talking with all of you. Have a good day.